Awesome. Well, I was super excited that Oscar was going before me because his talk is going to feed really nicely into my talk, where I'm going to talk a bit about how to take all these new open source models that have gotten released and make a decision about what is the best one for your application. Before I jump into that, quick introduction. My name's Rochelle Mattern. I lead our solutions architect and also for deployed engineering teams at Together AI. I just joined about a month ago, but prior to that, I was at Samba Nova Systems and also working in the open source LLM and generative AI space. So pretty much started in 2023 when the very first open source LLM with Llama 1 was released, and seen this journey in terms of how people are thinking about selection. So why did I choose this topic? Over the last probably 6 months, there has been a lot of development in this space. And I think it's caused more confusion about what model do I go with, but also a lot of excitement about the open source model capabilities that are coming out. Before I jump into this, I just wanted to get a quick raise of hands. How many of you guys have tried open source LLMs or generative AI models before? Awesome, great. So a good majority of you, which is awesome to see. Well, in the open source LLM space, we kind of all feel like this dog at the moment. There's a lot of really exciting things that have come out, a lot of progression that has been made. But ultimately, unlike this dog that has 4 treats in its mouth, we have to pick one for a given task. So we actually have to make some decisions, and the dog clearly can't. Why consider open source? I think this has been widely discussed and probably not an unknown classification onto why choose open source. But in practice, I'm really seeing people lean into open source for 3 key reasons. The first is around update control. When you build a closed source model into your applications, you're at the mercy of that closed source application provider in terms of the upgrades they make. And they happen pretty regularly. And as an application developer, we may not move at the same pace as that closed source model provider. And when they deprecate the model, you're kind of forced into making a decision as to upgrade. But with open source, you get a lot more control around that. Also seeing a lot more people leaning into the customization side of fine-tuning and training these open source models for specific tasks or company data sets. And then lastly, levers to control cost. And I'm not going to make the claim that automatically, out of the box, open source is going to be way, way cheaper than closed source. But there's a lot of levers to control your cost. And currently, I think everyone's thinking about that, right? The costs have exploded when it comes to generative AI model usage, and we need means of figuring out how do we meet cost requirements alongside actual capabilities that we need. But while these are greatly understood, I think there has been a lot of questions about, will it meet my performance requirements? So in the open source model space, we've seen huge progression since the first half of 2023 when we first saw Llama introduce Llama 1. Since then, there's been a ton of model providers that have come out, a lot of new capabilities, and while back in 2023, a lot of people were saying, wow, there's a huge gap to close in terms of open source model capabilities versus closed source. I think a lot of people would agree that nowadays it looks a lot closer. And so that innovation has really spearheaded the ability to actually seriously evaluate open source LLMs. Since 2023, we've seen 2x as many open source model releases as closed source. And what has changed during that time? Well, there's been 5 key changes that we've seen in terms of the model progression. The first is we've seen open source models become a lot larger. And what does that mean? We get more intelligence in those models. And we've seen open source models move from a dense architecture, meaning all those weights are activated at once, to a sparse architecture where we're only activating weights that are needed for a given prompt. And that's led to a lot more speed improvements, despite that models are getting larger, and a lot more efficiency in terms of actually having to run those models. Open source has also added new modalities. We originally started with just text, but we're now seeing models getting released that also have vision capabilities, audio capabilities, video capabilities. And the variety of providers are increasing, which leads to greater innovation, more licensing flexibility, improvements in language support. A lot of the early ones were Latin-based in terms of how they were trained, and so more choice. And lastly, customization is getting much, much easier. If I think about 2023, when I was doing fine-tuning all the time at Samba Nova, it was pretty difficult. And you actually had to have a lot of in-house expertise in fine-tuning to actually get good model results. And nowadays, it's so easy to actually submit a fine-tuning job. You just upload a data set, submit it to an API. And this is really commoditizing fine-tuning. Now, I don't want to oversimplify this. Getting a good data set is still very important. And so, yeah, now we have a huge collection of dog treats. So which do we pick? That's the open question. So picking the base model, essentially that model that you're going to take and try to build off of. The first thing you need to start to define is what is your requirements. So this starts with your business requirements. Open source models have different licensing capabilities. You may have a preference on the model origin or the model provider origin. You may have preference on what you can do in terms of customization. If you choose a huge model, your ability to actually iterate on fine-tuning, for example, might get more expensive and slower. And then you need to start outlining what your use case requirements are. So what's the use case you're solving? What's the tasks that are required to actually build that use case and piece it together? What's your workflow going to look like? Do you need capabilities like function calling? Someone was mentioning MCP earlier. So those requirements are really going to enable you to drive what I'm going to call the short list. This is a set of models that broadly meet your capabilities and you want to start evaluating. So now that's kind of where Oscar's talk comes into the picture. You need to start figuring out what is your evaluation approach going to look like. And there's a lot of different evaluation approaches out there. Oscar talked through some of them. There's a human evaluation approach. Some people are using the LLM as a judge approach. But what's most important is understanding what are your requirements, what does good look like? Because unless you spend some time doing that, you're going to have a really, really hard time orienting yourself in the sea of models that have come out. And then there's the accuracy side of things, which goes into some of these performance evaluations or quality evaluations. But applications nowadays, especially as we transition into the agentic era, have performance requirements that go beyond that too, right? If you're building a real-time audio application, you don't want the user on the other side of the phone to have to wait a minute before you get the response. That's a terrible experience. So you need to also consider, what is that model capable of providing in terms of speeds, for example? So how do you shortlist? Well, I think the answer is you just need to start getting familiar with what these different models are capable of. This is kind of an example here, and I just learned this today, but our DevRel team put together a simple application that kind of is decision tree oriented on which LLM. You can find it here if you're interested in testing it out. I haven't got the chance to try it, but I thought it might be helpful. But this is kind of an example that I use, right? In terms of the task, you need to start understanding, is it low complexity? Is it high complexity? Do you need reasoning capabilities? Are you going to need to do function calling, or do you need structured output because you're connecting to a system? In terms of text, what languages do you need to support? Unfortunately, a lot of the model providers, such as Llama, mostly trained on Latin languages, despite that they say that they support all these different languages. And so if for example, I was working with a Japanese customer, and we were trying to do some vision use cases. When we actually went to go test Llama 4 Maverick, despite it's a decent vision model, when it came to actually OCRing Japanese text, it failed miserably. But we tried Quinn out that had a lot more data provided in Japanese language. It did very, very well. So understanding what languages you need, and then the modality, of course. And so when you start to get familiar with the sea of models, you can start reasoning down which are the ones to start from your shortlist perspective. That's when you're going to start driving your evals. So once you've shortlisted and gone through your evaluation process, how do you actually start building upon that in terms of improving the model, whether that's accuracy or performance? Well, the first thing around accuracy is choosing the right model for the right task. But once you get that base model and you want to start improving it, there's a lot of different means of doing that. One of the leading ways that we're seeing people do this is through fine-tuning, and fine-tuning has come a long way. There's different fine-tuning mechanisms out there. There's your standard fine-tuning mechanisms. There's LoRa now. There's DPO, reinforcement learning. And there's also something that we're exploring pretty heavily internally at Together, which is this concept of distillation. This can be done to actually take knowledge from one model and distill it into a different model. But it also you can also distill a large model into a small model for performance improvements. Now, on the performance side, let's say you have a model that you really like, and you want to figure out how to make it fit a specific performance profile. Let's say you have end-to-end latency in mind, or you have a time to first token in mind, or a specific tokens per second profile you're looking to meet your application needs. Well, there's many different ways to optimize performance. That's the value that Together brings to our customer base. We have a huge research team that is highly skilled in performance tuning and have innovated and created a lot of these mechanisms that I'm showing on the screen. But there's ways to actually implement things like speculative decoding, where you take a smaller model, and that model essentially tries to answer the prompt, and then can revert back to a larger model when it doesn't have the right answer. Also, too, for inference, when you're working in the open source space, there's a bunch of engines that exist out there to actually run your inference, and those actually have a huge impact on your performance as well. Again, another area that we have a lot of in-house expertise and partner with our customers around is finding that right engine to meet the profile. And then I think something that a lot of people don't understand if they're looking in the open source space is there is a trade-off when it comes to cost considerations and performance considerations. And that really is trying to determine if you want to optimize for extremely high throughput, that's kind of your queries per second that you can run on a single system, or you want to optimize for latency or speed. You don't get both. Unfortunately, you have to kind of figure out where that balance is. You can have a balanced profile, but usually you're trying to optimize for one or the other. And then again, you can consider distillation. This was a really popular technique when DeepSeek came out. DeepSeek is a really large model, and so it was a little bit slow at the beginning. It's improved a ton. But one of the early techniques was distilling DeepSeek into a Llama 7dB model. And that Llama 7dB model, a lot smaller, a lot faster. Yes, it did come with trade-offs on accuracy, though. And there's a bunch of other techniques out there, but these are some that you can start to think about when you're trying to tune for performance. So the thing I want to leave you guys with is, first of all, we all have choice nowadays because the paradigm has really started to close between closed source and open source. But what you need to do is set yourself up to make decisions with speed and be able to iterate on that first decision. You may go with a closed source model to start because it may give you innovation velocity in terms of building your application. But that doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be your end game. I heard this at a talk a while back. Unfortunately, I don't remember who said this because I'd really like to give them credit in this moment. But one of the things that he said was, as we progress, the thing that is going to be key to staying ahead and a competitive differentiation is your ability to take what you start with and quickly change that, because this market is moving a billion miles an hour. There's new models coming out what feels like monthly. In fact, I think it has been monthly as of late, if not more frequent. And you need to be able to evolve with it. And so thinking through like evaluations, making sure you have a good understanding of your requirements and your profile, that is going to be the thing that is going to set you up for success in terms of growing with the market. So I want to leave you with, if you want to try out open source models, we have a serverless offering that makes it really quick and easy to test some of these models out. Give it a try. We have some free credits that come with that. And if you're trying to bring open source to production, then I'd love to connect, because that's something that I think our team can help a ton with. We have a lot of research expertise that we bring to our engagements, and also to just a ton of leading companies that we have been working with, from foundation model labs to large-scale enterprises to some of the leading AI native companies out there. And so we'd love to help you out with that. With that, I'd love to take some questions. There's like about 2.5 minutes.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the talk. I want to go back to what you said in the beginning, where you sort of outlined the timeline and the speed of how open source models have caught up.
Yeah.
How do you see that evolving if you were to extrapolate a year or two out? Are we going to see the same rate of change with open source models, or how might that evolve in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to continue to narrow. In fact, there is a chance that it surpasses. Now, the closed source model labs have entire teams going at this and are very well funded, but we're seeing a huge amount of open source labs popping up. And the beauty of open source is that there's a huge community backing it, and there's a lot of people contributing into it. And I think there's also, because there's so many out there, there's a lot of competitive feel to this as well. Everyone wants to be the best. And you can even see that with the model releases themselves, right? Like one releases and then the next tries to outdo that one. And so it's pretty exciting. So I think I think there's a few things that we'll see. Yes, I think we'll continue to close the gap. In fact, I think there's a chance that they'll be totally at parity. I think the one weak point right now of open source is the multimodality space. I think Gemini, for example, just did a big release around this, and it was a lot of fun to play with. I think it was really cool. I think it really brings the vision capabilities you need to actually integrate into applications. Closed source, I think, or open source is lagging a little in that space. And so I think hopefully we'll see a lot of innovation in the multimodality space, bringing better and greater audio models, vision models, video models to market as well.
Great. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, great. Thanks so much, Rochelle. Great, thanks so much for coming out, everyone, and massive thank you again to Jonathan, Oscar, and Rochelle for speaking tonight, and thank you guys all for coming out as well. We have the space for another hour or so feel free to hang out. The speakers will hang around for a little bit. You can ask them any questions you have. Unfortunately, you guys ate all the pizza, so there's none left, but yeah, thanks so much.